My wife laughed when someone asked if I was her husband. She said, "Oh, he's just here."
My wife, Maya, always thrived in rooms filled with important people. She absolutely glowed under bright lights on polished floors, with expensive wine in hand, engaging in conversations dripping with corporate ambition. I used to find it charming, that hunger in her eyes, that ambition she wore like expensive perfume. But somewhere along the line, she forgot who built the very platform she was standing on. Or maybe she remembered and simply chose not to care anymore. The night everything completely unraveled started at a housewarming gala for her new employer. The event was so extravagant it felt like they were trying to convince God himself to invest. The CEO had just wrapped up a speech full of meaningless buzzwords like operational velocity and transformative synergies. Maya was radiant, floating from one group to another, touching her boss's sleeve, laughing way too loudly at jokes that weren't even funny. She was performing like her entire life depended on it. Then, a real estate investor with a Rolex tan so bright it was blinding looked right at me and asked loudly, "So, is this your husband?" Maya laughed. Not just a chuckle and honest-to-God, full-throated laugh. "Oh," she said, waving a hand dismissively. "He's just here, like I was a coat rack?" A chair, a background prop in the movie of her life. I didn't react, I didn't even blink. I didn't ask for any clarification. I simply set down my wine glass on a passing tray, gave a slight nod, and walked out through the sliding glass doors into the cool night air. As soon as I reached my car, I made one phone call. "Tom, it's time." My attorney Tom paused mid-yawn on the other end of the line. "Time for what?" "Cancel the acquisition," I said. Section 14B, Conflict of Interest. There was dead silence. Then a sharp inhale. "Are you serious?" "She started working there 2 weeks ago." Another pause. Then his voice snapped into sharp focus, all sleepiness gone. "I'll send the notice immediately." "Do you want diplomacy or maximum impact?" "Maximum," I replied. And just like that, the firing pin was pulled. What Maya didn't know, what nobody at that polished, self-important event knew, was that the crown jewel acquisition her company had been preparing for the last 6 months depended entirely on my software. It was a logistics optimization platform I had built 10 years ago, all by myself, in our cramped little apartment while she was away at grad school on the other side of the country. While she was chasing degrees and networking, I was chasing solutions. I lived off a steady diet of energy drinks and frozen burritos, working until my eyes burned and the sun came up. But it worked. The system I built worked better than anything the industry had ever seen, and I never sold it. I licensed it discreetly through a shell LLC I named Apex Holdings. Hidden deep inside that licensing contract was Section 14B. It stated that if any employee, family member, or spouse of the licensor became affiliated with the acquiring company, the license would become void instantly. I wrote that clause at 3 in a haze of paranoia and cheap coffee, never, ever thinking I would actually need to use it. But on that night, when she laughed at me in front of some investor, the old version of me, the quiet, supportive man who funded her entire life without ever asking for a thing in return, finally went silent for good. The next day, Tom's notice detonated inside her company like a legal bomb. Implementation was halted, integration was frozen. Their entire projected quarter was annihilated in an instant. Investors started panicking. Developers were completely confused. Executives were screaming for answers. And Mia? She came home that evening bouncing with excitement. "You wouldn't believe how fast things are moving," she gushed, kicking off her heels. "They love me. I'm already leading some of the integration calls." She had absolutely no idea that I had already shut the whole thing down. No idea that the massive project she was bragging about ran on the very code I wrote. No idea that I had paid off her student loans, her MBA, the down payment on our house, all from licensing revenue she never once bothered to ask about. That night, I made mushroom risotto, her favorite meal, and just listened. I listened as she bragged about being the company's new rising star. She even laughed and mentioned that the system's architecture reminded someone of those old routing systems I used to play with years ago. "Small world, right?" she said with a smile. Incredibly small, I replied, stirring the risotto. By Monday morning, her entire company was in a full-blown crisis. Legal teams were frantically scanning every single document, and they quickly discovered the exact nature of Section 14B and the fatal conflict of interest she had triggered just by joining them. They dragged her into a glass-walled conference room. The CEO, the coup, the head of legal counsel, and her own boss all stared at her like she was a ticking bomb they just found in their office. "What exactly does your husband do?" the CEO asked, his voice cold. She just shrugged. "He used to run a small tech company. Nothing major," and then they played Tom's cease and desist recording for her. The color drained from her face. Her hands started to shake. Her voice cracked as she tried to explain. They confronted her with Slack messages she'd written, dismissing me as just a hobbyist who sold some code forever ago. She had forgotten her own words. But the legal team hadn't. Her projects vanished from the system. Her calendar was wiped clean, her email was disabled, her access was revoked. All her integration privileges were removed. In the hallways, her peers actively avoided eye contact. HR watched her every move like she was contaminated. Her entire professional reputation, which she had worked so hard to build, shrank to dust in a single afternoon. 3 days later, she finally came home. Her shoulders were slumped, her eyes were hollow. She found me in the kitchen, calmly pouring a cup of coffee. She just stood there, staring at me as if she were seeing a ghost. "What did you do?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. I took a slow sip of my coffee. "You said I was just here," I said calmly. So I left, and in that moment the silence in our kitchen was louder than any argument we'd ever had. The empire she thought she was building had been built on a foundation she never bothered to inspect. And now it was gone. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more.